I'll turn it on. Okay, it's not on right now. Is that height kind of
I
good?
think I think that height looks good, but you won't turn it on until it's time.
Yeah, yeah, no. Nothing's on now.
Nothing's on there. Okay, good. That's your.
And
Actually, maybe I wonder if we should put
I'll
this.
take that.
Yeah, will you?
Yeah.
so how should we position this? Yeah.
Not that way. What's easier for you? Like that?
And then when we turn,
Yeah, it's just one.
maybe this is about like that.
No, I'll be honest.
What? That's cute. Yes. I like that.
They're totally chill.
Okay.
Totally fine. They're
Good.
like, film video.
Okay. Cool. All right. I just want to make sure when I turn this page, I'm still close enough. Or maybe I should just move it. You know what I mean? So that
Is it double-sided or? It is. Okay.
yeah.
Do you want to
Morning, everyone, and welcome to Olin College of Engineering. I'm Gilda Barabino, and I'm president of Olin College. I'd like to begin by thanking Congressman Auchincloss for his leadership on behalf of Needham and for organizing events like this that focus on important issues like climate change. Former Congressman Joe Kennedy, thank you for your past service to this district and your continued commitment to public service through Citizens Energy Corporation, which ensures that low-income families have access to affordable energy. Representative Denise Garlick and Senator Becca Roche, thank you for all you do for Needham and our local area. I would also like to acknowledge and thank all the other state and local lawmakers who are here with us today. We are just 2 days past a hard-fought election, and it speaks to your dedication to your constituents that you make the time to be here today. I would also like to welcome members of the Needham and Wellesley communities, our neighbors, to campus today. As many of you know, Olin College was founded 2 decades ago with a grant from the F.W. Olin Foundation to revolutionize engineering education. In just over 20 years, we are now ranked second in undergraduate education, according to the U.S. News and World Report. Olin's mission is to transform engineering education toward a world in which engineering serves everyone. Engineering at Olin is informed by the college's values of equity, trust, learning, and growth, sustainability, and collaboration for the benefit of others, especially those who are in need. Today, we are discussing our climate, which is often referred to as being in a state of climate change. But really, we are in a state of climate emergency. While we used to think of the dangerous effects of climate change as being somewhere off in the future or far away in the Arctic, we know now it's happening right now and right here. Fires, flooding, sea level rise, and extreme heat are occurring in every part of the world. Just a few months ago, we saw Hurricane Ian hit Florida with a staggering fury. We are seeing loss of life, destruction of property, and the negative impact on economies. And the people who suffer the most are most often the most vulnerable among us: the poor, the marginalized, and very often people of color. Throughout history, humans have manipulated nature to serve our needs. Tree logs became wheels, rivers were diverted by aqueducts, and carbon sludge was transformed into a source of energy. Unfortunately, excesses in the manipulation of nature, like burning carbon fuels, we now know have dangerous consequences. And as much as the climate crisis is a result of the unintended consequences of technology, technology and engineering must play key roles in mitigating the climate emergency. This is why Olin strives to teach not just the technical tools of engineering, but also a set of values that encourages our graduates to ask, what are the consequences of what we are designing and building? How can we help people, especially the most vulnerable? It is also why our new strategic plan is structured around the idea of students making an impact in the world, and why our plan calls out sustainability and climate change and climate action as a key focus for Olin. As part of our new direction, Olin has a climate action team charged with making a difference on our campus, including using our campus as a living lab for fossil fuel reduction programs. One of the things that sets Olin apart is that our core values are integrated into our curriculum. And as you can see by looking around the room in our campus, our students are already putting learnings into action. Recently, they've campaigned for the college to work out a process for aligning our investment policies with our values. There is a boundless urgency to their request, and they have accepted it and approached it with transparency, humility, and within our values. They've also approached it with respect and collaboration. These are the people and countless other young people across the country and around the world who will bring much needed change. Let's applaud these young people. So I want to thank you again for joining us here at Olin and for your commitment to addressing the climate emergency on our planet. And now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Representative Jake Auchincloss. Representative Auchincloss is serving his first term in Congress and was in fact reelected yesterday. All right. But I must say, these days, I don't know if it's a curse or a blessing. He is vice chair of the Financial Services Committee. The congressman grew up in Newton, the son of a surgeon and a scientist who taught him to be a lifelong learner. He holds degrees from both Harvard and MIT. After graduating from Harvard, Congressman Auchincloss joined the Marines and served in Afghanistan. And in advance of Veterans Day, I'd like to say thank you so much for that service. Then upon his return home, he continued service as a 3-term city councilor in Newton and joined Liberty Mutual Innovation Lab. He was elected to Congress in 2020. So please join me in a warm welcome to Representative Jake Auchincloss.
President Barabino, I appreciate your gracious introduction and your hospitality for all of us here this morning. Welcome, everybody, to my Climate Action and Clean Energy Summit. 2 days ago, we had the midterms, and the period after an election is always a time for reflection. The 117th Congress, my first term, was historic. Pandemic, infrastructure, science and semiconductors, Afghanistan, Ukraine, guns. The challenges and the responses were seismic. On reflection, though, I think that there are 2 votes I'm going to tell my children, Teddy and Grace, about. One for all the wrong reasons and one for all the right ones. The first was on January 6th, 2021, when America failed for the first time since the Civil War to have a peaceful transfer of power, and when a majority of the House GOP conference voted against their oath to the Constitution in obedience to a would-be autocrat. That was a bad day for America. The second was on August 12th, 2022, when Congress passed the IRA, the biggest, boldest climate action and clean energy legislation in history. That was a good day for America. Cuts our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 by 40% within reach of our Paris Accord commitments. And I'm proud that a compromise version of an initiative that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and I co-authored to authorize the EPA to mandate generation shifting in response to the Supreme Court's ruling against that lawful power by the EPA made it into that law. Between the IRA and other investments that we made this Congress in infrastructure and science, we are putting $500 billion to work. $500 billion to work to achieve a future of clean air, clean water, and clean energy that is too cheap to meter. America is still not doing enough, but finally, we are doing something. Today, we're going to hear about the work from 3 critical perspectives. State-level policy and industry, because that's where the action is. Science and technology, because ultimately getting to 1.7 degrees Celsius is going to require game-changing innovation. And international affairs, because the United States, despite the fact that we are the world's leading economy, only accounts for about 15% of future greenhouse gas emissions. China and India in particular are critical for this planet-wide emergency. I hope you find these sessions productive. Again, thank you for attending. And I'm now going to hand it over to someone who does not need me to introduce him, because you all know him. In his second act, he has taken on the hardest problems in U.S. and state-level policy in pursuit of a clean energy future. Ladies and gentlemen, my predecessor, Joe Kennedy.
Good morning, everybody. Wonderful to be with all of you. Congressman, pleasure, honor. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation. Madam President, thank you for opening up the doors of Olin College in this incredible place that it is. It's wonderful for me to be back. Congressman, first off, congratulations on a very successful first term. There's a couple ways to run for re-election. For those of you that are aware of this, unopposed and scared. Unopposed is better, so congratulations and well done. I also got to tell you, Jake, now particularly as we start to move into a post-COVID world and people are gathering again, and I'm out and about more than we have been in a while, I run into people all the time that tell me how great a job you're doing, how engaging you have been, how responsive your office has been, how excited people are that you're their congressman, and it goes on and on and on, and I am forced to say, great. So glad to hear it. But congratulations again on an extraordinary compliment from the people of the 4th District to you and your team that came to fruition on Tuesday. So again, congrats. Everybody, I am excited to be here with all of you. I promise as one of your early speakers, I'm not going to be the reason why this conference gets off schedule. But I did want to say a couple of things kind of off the cuff to help frame, at least from my perspective, the extraordinary transition that we are in this moment. And that I think many of you or all of you are obviously well aware of. I transitioned over to Citizens Energy, an energy nonprofit that my father started about 40 years ago. Myself, I transitioned over there about a year or so ago. And it's really been an extraordinary moment for this organization. The company itself is an energy nonprofit that was founded to meet the needs of low-income families over 40 years ago in the midst of an energy crisis and energy transition. At that point, it was hostilities in the Middle East that sent oil prices spiking, that threatened to have low-income families not be able to heat their homes in the midst of a potentially very cold winter. So my dad started this nonprofit to try to find ways to actually then deploy solutions to help low-income families meet those basic needs. 40 years on, we are back in a very similar moment, where perhaps this time it's not hostilities from the Middle East, but in Ukraine, another global energy crisis, and the chance that low-income families are once again going to be left behind. Citizens Energy has evolved a bit over the course of that time. We are now a diversified renewable energy company focusing on battery storage and microgrids, solar fields. We have the largest low-income community solar program in the entire nation, and as well as an energy infrastructure model that is unique to any other organization, for-profit, not-for-profit, in this country. And that's what I think the Congressman wanted me to touch on a little bit today. Because we are at a point where we have to massively increase the amount of electricity we generate in order to meet our climate goals and to continue to meet climate goals off into the future. Estimates, as I think many of you are aware, are between 3 to 5 times as much electricity that we currently generate needs to be created in this country in order to try to stave off planetary disaster. So while we are eagerly awaiting new technologies to generate that electricity, we then need to move that electricity. And there's going to be a lot of different ways to do that, from distributed technologies and distributed opportunities. But if you're going to be generating it, you are still going to have to find ways to move it. We have also, thanks to the work of a number of organizations and people in rooms like this, learned that we cannot just generate and transmit the way that we used to. You can't just put those facilities or transmission lines in the backyards of low-income communities, communities of color, and force those communities to bear the burden of hosting that infrastructure for the rest of us. This is the birth of an environmental justice movement. So the question now becomes, particularly given, as the Congressman referenced, this enormous, finally, tailwind that the federal government has put for our society to try to actually increase generation capacity and increase the green technologies. How do we actually do this in a way that aligns with the needs of communities rather than coming at the expense of them? Because if you're going to do this, you can no longer build on top of communities. You've got to find ways to build with them. So that model has to change. Citizens Energy has, to my knowledge, the only scalable, replicable model that actually centers the needs of frontline communities, low-income communities for energy infrastructure anyplace else in the nation. And they've been doing it for about 15 years. The program I'll highlight here comes from Southern California, where about 12 years ago, Citizens was approached by one of the developers, one of the utilities, investor-owned utilities in Southern California, that was responding to a request from the grid operator in California to build new generation capacity to make sure that San Diego didn't experience brownouts as the population and the load in San Diego was growing. In order to do so, they needed to build a transmission line about 150 miles in the desert west of San Diego, east of San Diego, the line west to the city. But they needed to do that in the midst of some significant community opposition that said, we don't want a power line near us. Citizens Energy then partnered with the developers. It was nearly a $2 billion project. Citizens Energy invested about $100 million and took a lease of 30 years in the interest in that line and took half of our profits and reinvest them back into that community for whatever the community needs over the course of the next 30 years. For that one project alone, it comes off to millions of dollars a year reinvested in that local community, again, to meet the needs as defined by that local community. Energy rates don't increase for anyone. Ratepayers pay the same amount that they would otherwise pay. But the difference is that instead of the profits of that project, 100% of them going off to the investors that invest in that utility, a portion of those proceeds stay locally in that community that is hosting that infrastructure. We have used those profits initially to put rooftop solar on households of low-income families, and then transition that model to now provide 12,000 low-income households with reduced cost solar energy 12 months out of the year. So for the next 18 years, low-income families, 12,000 low-income households, will be able to get reduced cost solar energy, clean, renewable energy, while San Diego is able to make sure that they are able to keep the lights on. And the local community gets the investment from an investor-owned utility that otherwise would go straight back out to their investors. That model, we've now replicated a number of times in California, and we've got under discussions with a bunch of other organizations across this country to replicate as well, as an opportunity to show how you can work with communities to find ways to ensure that there is a stakeholder interest, that there's sustained engagement, and that are ways to actually get a community to help to engage in a conversation to ensure that communities' needs are going to be met while also meeting the climate needs that our planet and our country need to meet in order to stave off planetary disaster. So we're very excited about these prospects. We believe that there's a bright future to ensure that communities are treated with the respect and the attention that they deserve, and that we are able to actually start to find ways to build the infrastructure that we need in order to actually meet the goals that we all have set. So excited about those prospects. Congressman asked me to take a couple of questions. Happy to take a couple, and if not, you get to get ahead of schedule. So up to you guys. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So we've got a couple of projects in California. We are in discussions with various developers literally all over the country at this point. And that's been part of my job since arriving at Citizens, is running around the country, on both sides of this. One, letting utilities know of this opportunity of saying, hey, as you are in that long-term process, these major infrastructure projects obviously take a long time. And as you engage with the community, here's a way that for you as a utility can engage with us, Citizens Energy, and candidly get credit for giving away our money, right? Your utility, you've got to make a return to your investors. Instead of you saying on $1 billion line, you deploying the $1 billion, you deploy $800 million. But you can still return the same rate of return to your investors, so they're happy. But we'll spend $200 million, but then give half of our profits away. You still get to return to your investors, but you get credit for giving away our money. That opportunity now, thanks to the Congressman and others, is amplified because of some of the loan guarantees put in place by the infrastructure bill, And because of various programs like a $3 billion environmental justice fund or a $27 billion green infrastructure bank, where the profits that we would deploy locally could get matched or matched again to actually help deploy not just a couple $1 million a year, but $5, $7, $10 million a year to meet those needs. One option or one course for us is with those utilities that to some extent requires an enlightened utility CEO to say, I see that value, let's engage early on and try to get a community, help get a community bought in behind this, and we'll respond to those needs. Those folks are out there. The other opportunity, candidly, is with community organizations to say you are going to be approached by large-scale utility operators and developers about these infrastructure projects, and they're going to tell you they can pay for an easement, but that's basically the best that they can do. That's not true. There is another model out here where your community can, over the course of, in our example, 30 years, receive hundreds of millions of dollars in additional benefit if you are aware of it and if this is part of the dialogue back and forth with that developer. And so I'm running around the country talking to both those developers, but also talking to community groups saying, hey, when you're engaged in this process, understand that there's another avenue here that you might not have been aware of, but that increases your leverage here quite considerably. And one real opportunity here is First Nations and the tribal community, because particularly through much of the Midwest where many of these transmission lines are going to go, the cost of routing them around reservations it adds an awful lot to the cost of a project. If you're going to try to go through them, there's an opportunity to engage, and we're doing a lot of this with First Nations to say, hey, if you're going to come through our property, where, by the way, the federal government doesn't have eminent domain, there's an opportunity here for you to get a much better deal and treat it as a stakeholder you are, rather than just saying, we're going to pay for an easement. So, a lot of opportunity. Yeah?
Here you go, sir.
Sorry. Can you say a little more about what I think is the most fundamental thing, which is working with communities to develop solutions, and it connects with Olin's work with its students, because historically, I've been a Harvard faculty for years, we train students about solutions and they go out and try to give them to communities, which is the opposite of the approach that you're taking. Can you say a little bit more about what schools like Olin can be doing to have students learn the excitement and energy and power that comes out of more humbly going to communities and then working with them?
So, Professor, thank you. When I left college, I went into the Peace Corps. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and this is kind of like Peace Corps 101 again, right? You can, and politically, Jake might agree with this, might not. I don't want to put you on the spot about it, but I just did. Democrats get very good at diagnosing problems. Because a lot of folks there are pretty smart and can say, this is the challenge that a community is facing. Building a solution means, right, treating a patient is different than diagnosing one. And there needs to be an equity in that relationship where you are able to work with a community to say, we can tell you what's in your best interest, but what's really in your best interest is for you to be seen, heard, and decide on your own what is with your best interest. And so trying to say this is how you should spend your money or this is how you should go about it, whatever, is fundamentally not what powers this solution. What powers the solution, which is why engaging with those enlightened utility operators earlier on rather than trying to come in and clean up a mess, which is not what we want to do, but it's actually engaging in that conversation saying, hey, what are the needs in a community, and how could $5 million a year over the course of the next 30 years, or $7 million a year, or $2 million a year, whatever it is, how could that help meet them? And how would you design that? And what can we do to try to help shape that? And what is it going to take to get there? And that is a fundamentally different conversation about how we address the needs of climate, which empowers local communities in a way in which they have never been engaged before. And that, I think, is the true power of this model. With that, I'm done. Thanks, everybody.
Joe, thank you for coming today, for your creative and collaborative work with Citizens Energy, for all your advice. I'm a better congressman because I ask for his advice and take it. We're going to get right into it. First panel up is about state-level, Massachusetts-level policy and industry. It's going to be moderated by my friend, Chairman Jeff Roy. Please come up. I'm not going to introduce the whole panel. I'm going to let Jeff do that, but I will say about Jeff, he is the chair of a highly influential telecoms committee at the State House, and really, I don't think I'll get in trouble for saying this, more than anybody else at the State House, responsible for passing Massachusetts' generational climate action and clean energy bill in August. And yes. And he is going to moderate the panel and introduce the panelists.
Well, thank you, Congressman. And first of all, let me start by thanking you for engaging in this type of a conversation. I was thinking on the drive over here how much different this conversation could have been with the election on Tuesday. Joe, I was one of those ones running scared. I would not have wanted to be here before you all announcing that I had lost my race, and thankfully it worked out very well. And it's so good to see so many folks here. What do those orange T-shirts say on them? Divest. Oh, okay, that's not in my committee. But it's really amazing to be here in this context because our climate and clean energy bill passed in July. The governor signed it on August 11th. A few days later, you did the Inflation Reduction Act. You'd almost think we worked on this together. But the pieces really came together, and we had a great day on Tuesday. So I'm really confident about what's going to happen with climate action. In the last, or this session, which is still going on, we did the roadmap bill. That was the first thing that Speaker DeLeo had charged me, Speaker Mariano had charged me with. Wow. This is not recorded, is it? Please. Well, thank you. But the first thing he said, I hope you've been following what's been happening with the roadmap bill in Massachusetts, because that's now your first responsibility. And 5 weeks later, we had that bill back on the governor's desk. And on March 26, 2021, he signed the roadmap bill, and we set the goals for where Massachusetts was going to have to be by 2050. And then we immediately got working on the climate, energy, and offshore wind bill, which gave us the tools to enable us to reach those goals. And I'm so excited that in the middle of all of this that President Biden had announced a 30-gigawatt goal for offshore wind in the United States of America. And I am so excited that geographically we are poised to deliver 11 gigabytes of that 30 gigawatts right here in Massachusetts. The Massachusetts waters have the most robust wind in the contiguous United States, and we can be the leaders on that effort, and we have so many champions, many of whom are in this room, to deliver on that prospect. So that's a little bit of an introduction to what we have been doing, and I'm so glad that I'm going to return for another 2 years and hopefully return as the chair of that committee and do some more climate work. But I want to introduce our panelists today, beginning with Daniel Seeger, who's a development director with the RWE Renewables and former Undersecretary of Environmental Affairs at EEA. Daniel, come on up and join us. We also have Ben Downing, who sat in my chair on the Senate side for so many years. Today, he's the Vice President of Public Affairs at MIT's The Engine and a former Massachusetts State Senator. Good to see you, Ben. And we also have Carolyn Hone, the head of the Gas Network Strategy and Planning for New England for National Grid. So great to have everyone here. So I'm going to ask every one of you to just begin by telling us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what brings you here. Take 2 minutes to tell these folks who you are, and then we'll get into some questions. Dan, why don't you start?
Great, yeah, thank you, Chairman, for the introduction, and thanks for the invitation, and thanks for holding this event, Congressman. I think it's, not only happy to be here as a panelist, but as a constituent of yours. I really appreciate you, having such a sharp focus on such an important issue. So as the Chairman said, my name is Dan Seeger. I'm a development director with RWE Renewables. I lead our offshore wind projects in the Northeast of the United States, so head development in our New York Bight and our Gulf of Maine projects. I've been with RWE for about 6 months. Prior to that, spent a long time in government in the executive branch, working under 2 governors, and most recently as Undersecretary for Environmental Affairs. So I'm excited to take a lot of the work that I did working with the state and working with the legislature and bring that into fruition as we advance offshore wind in the Northeast. So thank you.
Tell us who you work with at that great RWE.
And I work with Katie
organization.
Theoharides, who I'm actually sitting in for today. She was sick and has had sick kids at home, so happy to sub in.
All right.
Thanks.
Caroline.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Chairman, for the introduction, and thanks for having me today. My name is Caroline Hahn, and I lead our gas business in New England for National Grid. What that means in my role is that I'm responsible for the asset management, the engineering, the system and work planning for the network that delivers energy to close to 900,000 homes and businesses throughout Massachusetts. And in that means that we're thinking about what that means for this huge problem of climate change. So myself, personally, I'm a problem solver. I'm an engineer. No history in politics at all, but go engineers here.
I see them.
And I think about the problems that I solve every day, and I love to solve problems that I can really make a difference in. So this week, for example, I was solving a problem with my 8-year-old who had a flat tire on her bike. And that was avoiding a minor crisis in our household because she wanted to play with her friends, and that was a flat tire there. But then in the same week, I'm working on thinking about how we're electrifying heat in our buildings, thinking about how can we, and developing those solutions to use district geothermal, which is something I'm looking forward to speaking about today. So this problem around climate change is something that we absolutely have to solve. And I'm really excited to be part of an organization that has a great part to play in this and that has a huge role that we can do. So thank you.
Great. Ben, please tell us life after TUE. Do I have a chance?
Thank you, Chairman Roy and Congressman for having us here, and President for having us here on campus. My name is Ben Downing. As the Chairman said, I was Chair of Telecom, Utilities, and Energy for 6 of the 10 years that I represented the 52 communities that are as far away from here as you can get and still be in the state of Massachusetts. I know I hold my Western Mass credentials hard when I turn on local news, and I still get frustrated when I see the weather person standing in front of my hometown and my region and saying, no, we need to know what it's like in Western Mass as well. Represented Western Mass in the Senate for 10 years, worked on a variety of legislation that we'll talk about and that Chairman Roy and so many others have improved on and built on. Spent 5 years working at Nexamp, doing solar and storage development, specifically community solar outside of the Northeast, but then building a storage team, developing projects here, helping commercial and industrial users. And then now working at the Engine Venture Fund and Business Accelerator, spun out of MIT, that's investing in tough to commercialize technology in climate, human health, and advanced systems and infrastructure, trying to make sure that we not only build the solutions and invent the solutions to the big problems facing society here in Massachusetts, but that we capture the economic benefits of that innovation, that creation here regionally, and deploy those solutions regionally. So looking forward to the conversation and hoping to add a little bit too.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I can tell you that one of the first conversations I had when I took over the committee, Congressman Auchincloss called me and he said, you really need to focus on wind. There's such an opportunity in offshore wind in Massachusetts, and I am so grateful for that call, and I hope I didn't let you down. All right. So, with that as the outset, I would love to hear from you, the three of you, how your organizations that you all represent can help the state meet its 2030 mandate of 50% emission reduction and the 2050 mandate of 85% emission reductions. Why don't we start with you, Dan, and go right down the line.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that, the key to meeting those emissions reduction goals is going to be electrification across, the entire economy. And I think that offshore wind is going to be a really pivotal part of that, as you know. And I think, looking back at Ben's leadership when he was in the Senate, your leadership on the most recent climate bill and the IRA coming out of the federal government, I think it's really paving the way for offshore wind development, not only in the Northeast, but across the, the whole United States. And I think that, as you said earlier, Chairman, Massachusetts is kind of uniquely geographically poised where they can tap into the existing offshore wind Massachusetts lease areas. They're directly poised for offshore wind coming in from the Gulf of Maine that we're looking out into development with BOEM now. So I think as we look at electrification for houses, for cars, for commercial uses, I think offshore wind and the capacity and the size of generation that we bring to the table is going to be a real key to succeeding there.
And I think these people want to know if RWE is going to bid on the next round of offshore wind in Massachusetts.
Well, we'll wait and see. We'll wait and see.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Caroline.
Great. Well, as Mr. Kennedy alluded to, the utility has a huge part to play here as we think about all of the elements of what we're trying to achieve. And actually, I take a moment to reflect on 2050 and how ambitious that goal is, because we're closer to 2050 than we are to 1990. And 1990, I remember my best friend at that time and what we were doing, and 2050 is actually right around the corner, and so it's a hugely ambitious goal. So when I think about the utility and what we're doing, I think of our emissions as a whole and what are each of those pillars that are actually contributing. So first, we've got a part to play in the electrification of transport. We look at what are we doing around our vehicle charging infrastructure, how are we providing that equitably to our customers, and that's about, I'm really excited to think about how we're doing that, not just in homes and building the infrastructure to enable that, but also around utility poles and allowing that for street charging as well. Then you move on to buildings and building emissions and how we reduce emissions there. And I mean, that's the part that I really have a huge part to play in the gas business, is how do we actually take and deliver a different type of fuel to some customers, target electrification, and completely decarbonize. I'm excited that we recently announced our plan to decarbonize and go completely fossil-free by 2050. Which will reduce our emissions. It's very exciting through a combination of a number of different pillars. One is around making sure that we're absolutely focused on building efficiency and energy efficiency. The second is looking at how we can actually hybridize our heating so that we can do move to air source heat pumps where we can, and then for those peak coldest days where you would ideally be working on resistance heat, that you can use your gas network, at which point it will be decarbonized through a combination of renewable natural gas and hydrogen, and then finally targeted electrification, which includes our geothermal program as well. So I'm very excited.
Excellent. And Ben, I know you are in the innovation center of the world. What's on tap over at your organization?
Yeah, so I think a couple of ways that we can be helpful there, Chairman Roy. I think first on the 2030 goals, where we can be helpful at the engine, we're not just looking at companies coming out of MIT, but we're looking at companies and opportunities across the country, across the globe. And so I think what we can do to be helpful there is to share where are the opportunities that other states are creating, right? Where can we learn from where other states have gone further and faster than us? Where can we learn where other states have done better than us, right? And I think there are opportunities and examples in the work, say, that New York has done through the REV process, right? Sort of a comprehensive view of how you take the regulatory framework from one economy and from one delivery system under energy, and you use it to drive innovation, drive investment in clean energy, in decarbonization of the entire economy, and using the structure that we already have. Things like that highlight for us the fact that if you look at the investments that Massachusetts has made in clean energy and R&D versus some of our competitor states, California and New York, adjusted per capita, are investing 200 to 300% more than we're investing in clean energy R&D here in Massachusetts. A real opportunity for us to grow and to capture more economic opportunities here by supporting the Clean Energy Center and others. At the 2050 level, right, some of the investments that we're making, we think are the key investments to get us there, whether that's investing in fusion through Commonwealth fusion systems, investing in long-duration energy storage and Form Energy and some of their competitors, but also things like much more efficient transmission applications like Veer and other companies that are doing high-performing superconducting tapes that will make our transmission corridors, those tough-to-permit projects that Congressman Kennedy had talked about, will make those corridors much more useful as we have to use much more electricity in the future that we build out. Those are some of the steps that we can take, and we want to be partners in all the work across the board.
Well, that's exciting, and because you mentioned Commonwealth Fusion and because you mentioned Form Energy, tell these folks what those players are doing in this space and what it means to climate change over the next several decades.
Yeah, so first, it's tough to explain what Commonwealth Fusion means, and I think
Look, you have
Dennis
30
White's going to
minutes.
be on one of the later panels. But I will
Next panel.
But
There
I
you
will
go.
simply say this, right? Commonwealth Fusion System is going to be the first company to commercialize fusion energy, right? Long seen as the holy grail when it comes to clean energy or to decarbonizing and reducing emissions across our economy. They will do it. That is the most ambitious and incredible team we have seen, a combination of science, technology, and engineering leadership with the capital to support and to go out and deploy it. So incredibly exciting to see, and quite frankly, incredibly difficult not to talk about the science of it, but to think about just how transformative that technology is going to be. Form Energy, a little bit easier. Energy storage that folks like me and others have been out developing, that the utility's been deploying, that RWE is looking at right now on their projects, that's pretty much the same technology that's in our phones, that's in our batteries, on our computers, right? Generally lithium-ion technology, really good for short bursts, not good for those long durations that you need when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. That's where Form Energy comes in, where they're not doing 2- and 4-hour batteries. They're doing 75- and 100-hour duration batteries that are going to be able to provide that strong backbone that we need on the grid that is 100% clean moving forward.
Fantastic. And I know there's some idea builders in this room, and they should talk to you about getting some funding for those initiatives.
Ideas the better.
Excellent. And Caroline, talk to us about some of the things that National Grid is doing and what they're experimenting with, and please talk to us about the wells that we were talking about earlier today.
Great. Well, experimentation for somebody who's it's a funny word for me because I'm a chemist at heart, an engineer, and I think about experimentation and what that means. But then also on the flip side, my role in the utility in delivering safe and reliable service. So we're really thinking about how do you deploy proven technology in different ways, in use cases that enable us to make the transition affordably and equitably. And first, absolutely, the geothermal wells. So we are just about to announce our first site for our first district geothermal heating grid in Massachusetts. And this, for those of you who aren't aware, we're looking at ground source heat pump technology, where instead of using air exchange for your heat exchange, we're going underground. It's not, in these cases, we're drilling pretty deep down so that where the temperature remains at a good constant temperature, you're not worried about how cold or hot it is outside. You eliminate commodity costs, and that technology deploys then where it's running through the right-of-way for your utility, but also the whole area, about 40 to 60 customers can actually tap into that and utilize that technology. So we're incredibly excited. It's well known, but we haven't really seen district geothermal come on play where we're actually able to utilize the utility of the utility. So that I find that to be really exciting. So again, the technology, not so difficult. It's really about understanding for us what our experiment is about, what the customers, how are they going to experience this? What's that going to mean? And frankly, for the homes, for the people who are there, what is that also, in this demonstration program, we're actually going to be covering the costs of all of the retrofit of the homes and as well as the appliances. But I think what we're going to be starting to look at and what we're seeing in some of the other areas across our footprint is what's going to happen when customers actually have to pay for that themselves. with some subsidies, but $50,000 to $60,000 for a retrofit is unaffordable for many. And so as we think about that, we're also going to be understanding the customer behavior. So I'm really, really excited about that. We're also looking at how we can blend different clean fuels into our existing infrastructure. So it's an exciting time.
Well, I'm certainly hopeful that with the federal bill and the state bills and the ideas that we put into play and the funding that we put into play, that we're going to be able to help with those retrofits. Dan, talk to us about some new advancements in offshore wind that are pushing RWE and its technology forward.
Yeah, so I think, one of the most interesting parts about offshore wind is we're literally building an industry from the ground up here in the United States. And I think with that comes the opportunity to constantly evolve and increase innovation and increase technology. As when you look back at when we were doing the first offshore wind solicitation in Massachusetts, we were looking at projects coming in with 5-6 megawatt turbines. Now as we look out to 2030, we're looking at turbines that are 2 to 3 times the size already, right? So
turbines that won't fit into the testing facility that we have in Boston.
That's the blades, but yeah, it's constantly evolving and expanding. But so I think that's it's an interesting opportunity to continue to evolve and bring new technology into the industry as we begin to grow here in the U.S. And I think on the RWE side specifically, we're working with the University of Maine to commercialize the first floating foundation here in the United States. We're actually ahead of our colleagues in Europe and potentially coming up and commercializing and putting patents on a floating turbine that can be deployed out in the Gulf of Maine that brings American jobs, comes with an American foundation, and I think it's steps like that are really going to grow the offshore wind industry here in the United States and make sure that we see the job benefits, the economic benefits, and the innovation benefits that come with it.
And I think the investments in the Salem port are key to your success up in the state of Maine.
That's obviously that's already helping the industry with the Massachusetts lease areas, but that's going to be a key location to unlocking the potential out in the Gulf of Maine.
Fantastic. Ben, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it's incredibly exciting to talk about innovation, and I think oftentimes, and I probably shouldn't say this as the guy who works at an innovative VC, right? But oftentimes in climate debates, it's like people feel the need to put themselves in one camp or another. There's either we've got all the solutions, just deploy what we've got, or we've got to invent the game-breaking technology. And I think what you're hearing up here and the exciting part about sort of this discussion today, we need both. And we have both, right? Like we now have the tools to go out and deploy everything, right? Like we've got to build every last solar project, every storage project, every wind project. They've got to get out there. We've got to do every energy audit, every geothermal, everything that we can. And right, like we need those on 30, and to get to 50 and beyond, we need the game-breaking technologies as well. And so we need to get out of some of the fundamental debates that we've been in for too long and stuck in for too long, and recognize the fact that the two are mutually reinforcing, not mutually exclusive.
Well, fantastic. I gather there's no one in this room who's not a fan of innovation and new ideas, because we truly need a menu of options to move forward. Let's just shift gears for a bit and talk about what steps could be taken to continue to secure support for environmental justice communities in this climate transition. We'll start with you, Dan.
Yeah, I think from the developer perspective, and I think former Congressman Kennedy, hit the nail on the head earlier. It's about working with the communities, not necessarily going into a community and telling them, what they need. It's about, being transparent and showing up and working with them from the ground up on these projects to make sure that, their voices are being heard and they're seeing the benefits of the project. I think that, it's easy for a developer to sort of write a check and walk away and feel like, they've done their part for the community. But I think, the reality is that, our projects don't succeed unless the communities succeed with it. And I think that, showing up and working with the communities on what they need and, providing opportunities like job training, providing opportunities like, wraparound services for transportation and childcare so that people can actually show up at those trainings and pursue those employment opportunities, I think are all key to, ensuring a sort of a just transition as we, enter into this clean energy economy. So I think, like I said, the number one thing is just showing up, listening, being transparent, and be willing to put in the work.
Caroline.
Completely agree with everything that you've just said. And I think about how also as we're thinking about regulatory mechanisms, what can we do to make sure that we're prioritizing environmental justice communities at the same time? So for example, one of the criteria that we have in our selection of our geothermal program sites has been around are we serving an environmental justice community, an environmental justice population? But it starts with listening to that population, to the folks who live there, to say, yeah, this is great. Like, we're going to fix up your house. You're going to have cheap energy here. But are you okay, actually? Like, here's where we might be siting these wells. They're going to be underneath this parking lot, or they're going to be near this playground. And what does that actually mean to you? And I think that that's the key for us to be thinking about, not only just how are we prioritizing it, but then what are we doing? What are the steps that we're taking to listen carefully?
And Ben.
Yeah, so on the teams that we're investing in at the engine, we know compared to others in their cohort, right, compared to those, sort of their own peers, that those teams are disproportionately women, disproportionately led by individuals of color, and have individuals of color and women on their boards as well. So we're trying to build diversity, equity, and inclusion into these teams right from the start. We know and they know that makes them better, stronger teams on the whole. And I think on the policy side of things, this is one of the real powers of the Inflation Reduction Act, and quite frankly is something that we've learned at the state level. So in the Inflation Reduction Act, if you want to be able to maximize the incentives, you need to be able to build those deep partnerships with communities. It's not going to be enough to just say, all right, we get the incentive to do any project anywhere. If you want to build the best economic project, you need to be able to partner with those communities. It's going to drive developer behavior. It's going to drive company formation behavior. It's going to drive where capital is invested. And I think that's more powerful than even some of the acts that we took earlier on, where we did more on sort of the programmatic side. Some of the Pathways Out of Poverty program that I wrote at the CEC didn't do as much as we wanted it to because we didn't have the capital behind it as well. That's where the federal capital starts to change developer behavior, and you're going to see a far greater sort of amplification of those efforts, and that's exciting.
Well, fantastic. And I can guarantee you people are awake. You've had your coffee. You've had your muffins. Do you have any questions for this stellar panel? Sir.
I didn't know there were muffins, man.
Wait for the microphone.
Mike, I'm not across the room, but I will throw
I have never seen one of those.
All right.
Wow.
Can everybody hear me?
Right there, yeah.
Big round of applause for my friend over here with the mic. Good morning, folks. My name is Matthew O'Brien. I am a legislative aide in the office of your friend, State Representative Carol Doherty from Taunton, and I'm a former elected official from Mendon, Massachusetts. My question is for you guys regarding what we can do in state government to be more effective partners for you guys, and what you guys see as the largest regulatory or policy barrier to expanding your missions.
And before you answer, Carol was one of those also running scared, and she's coming back too. So great.
Thank you to the voters of Taunton.
Who wants to take that question?
I mean, I'm happy to start. I really can't underscore how huge of a partner that the state legislature has been for the offshore wind industry. I mean, we've been working sort of, I think hand in glove for years now, as recently as the bill that the chairman led this past summer that took the price cap off of the future procurements. I think is going to unlock a lot.
That's an incentive for RWE to bid.
Yeah. And so, I think, as far as the biggest hurdle, I think it's sometimes, not letting some of the, higher level politics and the wanting to, be the winner of a certain argument get in the way. I think it's really working collaboratively, with industry, with your constituents, with the executive branch of government to make sure that the best ideas are moving forward, and you're really just, you're clearing hurdles for the deployment of these technologies, because it is going to be essential for meeting our climate goals.
Anybody else want to weigh in?
The state needs a plan to take advantage of the generational opportunity that is the Inflation Reduction Act. There will be resources that are going to flow to the state. There are going to be resources that will automatically flow to the state. There are a lot that are competitive. We need to have a clear, concise plan that we're communicating with our federal delegation to the federal agencies to maximize that, number one. Number two, we need to make it far easier to interconnect to the grid. As we have interconnected more and more projects, it has somehow gotten more costly and takes longer to do. That shouldn't be the case. It should be working in the exact opposite direction.
Precisely why we put that Grid Modernization Advisory Council in place to jumpstart this.
And final point, Massachusetts needs to lead as we have tried to, but we need to continue to push the envelope with ISO New England so that ISO is not creating more barriers, but rather they're leading the direction of a transition.
Other questions, right, sir? Toss him. Oh, there it is. The microphone has been tossed. Oh.
Only when necessary.
All right, well, we'll come back to you for the next question. You got it.
I'm trying to understand the meaning of gas network strategies. I understand strategy is kind of an overarching view of how we do things. I mean, my impression was the gas strategy was to eliminate gas. And what are you doing to eliminate gas? I mean, I know, like, I live in Newton, and a lot of money and time is spent digging up streets and fixing every gas line. Nobody I know was given the option of putting in a heat pump. If you had to get, I mean, this was never even discussed with my neighbors. What are you doing to eliminate
let me
gas?
let Caroline address that, because I think you're probably the best equipped up here to do it.
Probably so. So I think when I think about our strategy, it is, yes, there is a huge part to play around electrification of heat and decommissioning of parts of our gas network. But that doesn't happen immediately. And there are people who will, and there's no stopping that. And that's great, right? Because you're able to. But in some cases, and I know that you're saying nobody you know would do this, but others, there are people, I know a lot of people who actually cannot disconnect today. And they cannot afford an air source heat pump that moves to resistance heating with electric prices the way that they are today. And so when I'm thinking about our strategy and our planning, it's like, how do you plan for that over the course of the next decade as we think about how we're doing this? Yes, what are the things that we need to put in place so we can reduce consumption and bring that down? What are the things that we can do to inform so that customers can be educated about how and when is the right time for them to make that transition? But it doesn't happen immediately, because if I could turn it all off today, we have a lot of people who would not have heat today. And that is not the case, not where we are. So that's really, as I'm thinking about the overall plan and the strategy, so how do you make that work? How do we bring decarbonized heat, whether that's through electricity, whether that's through fossil-free gas? How do we bring that to the millions of people in Massachusetts today?
All right, we have time for 2 more questions, and you've got the box first, and if you can throw that up in that area of the room for the last question. How's that?
Thank you. Building
Whoever
code.
catches it gets the question.
Yeah, I saw someone over there.
Building code. So you've been in the lead. I see Massachusetts in the lead, and it's thanks to you, Representative Roy, and others who've brought the Massachusetts building code to where it is. It's about to be available for communities in, 6 weeks. And so my question is, what do you see going forward to keep Massachusetts in the lead? DOE just announced millions and millions of dollars for state building code development. I hope Massachusetts' the brand new code is going to be a model, but do you see that code amending or changing at some time, and if so, what time, to be fossil fuel not allowed? Thank you.
Well, I'll start off on that particular question, because one of the things that we did in the climate bill was to put a pilot plan in place to see if fossil-free communities can work, and we have a rigorous report requirement under the bill, so we're going to see what that report does. But going to clue you in, we had a new governor elected on Tuesday that I think is going to come in with her own energy and her own ideas, and I certainly foresee this issue being at the forefront for many years, and I'm looking forward to getting to work on new climate legislation that we will introduce in January of 2023, and I'm glad I'm going to have an opportunity to do that. Any of my fellow panelists want to take on that as well? All right. Who's got the blue box?
I do. Thank you. Thanks for having this panel. My name is Lisa Cunningham. I'm an architect, and I'm also the founder of a statewide building electrification movement in Massachusetts, now comprising over 30 towns and cities. And I'm also the founder of a nonprofit called Zero Carbon MA. I wanted to address Caroline Hunt. Thank you, everybody. I'd like to address Caroline Hunt's misstatements about heat pumps. Heat pumps work perfectly fine without backup resistance. That's a completely false statement. Heat pumps can operate very effectively to minus 15, even minus 20 degrees. They do not need backup resistance. We have the technology right now. It's actually more cost efficient to install all electric technology, and it is also much more favorable in terms of operationally, in terms of running all electric buildings. So right now the state is continuing to incentivize building new fossil fuel infrastructure that we need. We know we need to remove. The state's own climate plan has said this, and gas is soon becoming a stranded asset. So my question to you is that obviously low-income people, as has been bandied about, our low-income communities are not going to be left holding the bag for these stranded assets. The state or the gas companies are going to be left holding the bag, and the state means the ratepayers or the taxpayers, and the gas companies are continuing to incentivize. They're even bribing towns like Wellesley to install gas lines. My question is, how are you going to prevent having these stranded assets being paid by the ratepayers when actually the utilities should be the ones holding the bag?
All right. Caroline, let me let you take that off the bat, and if the other panelists want to chime in, please do.
Well, first, it's hard, right? And then let's not pretend that this is an easy solution for anybody, and I get it, right? That is there. So acknowledge your statements, and so your question coming down to how are we actually going to prevent this? I think first, we've got to look at long-term planning, and we have to look at long-term planning from an integrated perspective, starting at your customer area, looking at your electric infrastructure and what it can actually do and how we can build in a way that is thoughtful and deliberate, and planning your gas network and what you're doing around potentially, do you replace? Do you cut it off? Do we replace it with different technology? And how does that look on a segment-by-segment, street-by-street level? And I think that very tactical piece of things is something that we absolutely have to do. It's a no-regrets option, regardless of what the policy states. There are different regulatory mechanisms in place that I agree with you. We need to evaluate, because the energy transition is something that we're here now, and some of our mechanisms that have continued to evolve are going to need to evolve going forward in the future. I'm not sure that, as we think about stranded assets, I mean, your question was how do we avoid it? And I really do think it's about that long-term planning piece, being thoughtful and bringing to bear what our engineers and our talent can do.
And I think getting more innovation from Ben and Dan are part of that solution as well. Any final thoughts that Dan or Ben you want to add on that question?
I would just have that we have all of the tools right now to make the transition. What we need is a clear vision at the state level, right? And I know you've worked to provide that, Chairman Roy, but I think leadership from the corner office to be able to leverage the resources and the talent that we have the ability to do it, to go out, deploy, innovate, and build.
Well, fantastic. Let me just say again, thank you, Congressman Auchincloss, for putting this together. Thanks for the opportunity to do it. Thank you for a great panel, great candor, and great answers. And let me just finally call out some of my colleagues from the legislature who are here, Representative Tommy Vitolo from Brookline and Representative Joan Machino from Hell. They have been great partners in this effort, and they're all coming back, too. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chairman Roy, and to our panel. Particularly, Caroline, thank you for handling some tough questions with grace and substance. Ladies and gentlemen, before I was a member of Congress, I was a Marine Corps officer, and we take punctuality very seriously. So when I say that we're doing a 10-minute break, I really mean it. We're doing 10 minutes at 10:19. 10:19, I'm kicking this thing off, so please be back here. Thank you. Everybody, please take your seats. Everybody, please take your seats. It's always the politicians who are talking. Everybody, please take your seats. Yes, please take your seats. Yeah, it's on. Is this? All right. Okay. Yeah. Seats, please. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to start our second panel. Please find your seat. Welcome back. We have two panels remaining. The first is going to be about emerging technologies, about the science and tech that are at the cutting edge of clean energy. And the second is going to be about international innovation and diplomacy, about the foreign affairs that are going to help us drive as a planet to 1.7 degrees. So first panel will be about science and technology. That's going to be moderated by Jen Deloisio. Jen is the director of the Mass Clean Energy Center. I'll let her give a fuller introduction of herself, but basically what that means is she is quarterbacking much of the intersection between science, technology, and public policy. Jen, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you to Congressman Auchincloss for bringing us together here today to talk about this important topic. The last panel was really just so interesting and engaging, and I'm really so grateful for many of our state legislature who are really important partners in this work and are here with us today. So I am Jen Deloisio. I'm the CEO of the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. At the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, we're a quasi-state agency. And we work to grow the clean energy industry here in Massachusetts while helping us meet our ambitious climate goals. So as Chairman Roy mentioned, those ambitious climate goals include, signed into law, a 50% reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050. We approach that work in a few ways, and Ben talked about this on the last panel. We look to accelerate the adoption of commercially ready technologies. We do that by piloting and demonstrating models that can be scaled by the private sector, by organizations like MassSave. We look to make sure that we have a diverse and equitable workforce that can participate in this industry. It's new, it's growing, and we want to make sure that not only do we have the workforce ready to meet the needs of this industry, but that it's both diverse and equitable. And finally, the topic of this panel today is emerging technologies. So we work to support innovation and technology development by knowing that we need new and innovative solutions and technologies to help us get to our goals at an increased pace, a faster method of transition, but also getting there cost effectively. So we have this sort of all of the options approach. And we're particularly excited about creating programming that can help us reduce our greenhouse gases. So a number of ideas that we have that we work on. We know many businesses are interested in converting their delivery vans and trucks to electric, but they don't quite know how to get there. So we launched a fleet advisory program to help companies build out a roadmap to help plan for that transition. We know many commercial building owners also want to electrify and decarbonize their buildings, but they need help, and that's why we're soon launching a program to help provide technical assistance to those building owners. And like many of you homeowners here today that want to decarbonize your homes. but you don't know where to begin. And we have a decarbonization pathways program to help homeowners take the right steps in the right order for what makes sense in their budget. For technology development, we fill crucial funding gaps with grants and early stage investments. Massachusetts is rich in bold and talented innovation, and MassEC can provide funding to help our startups take off and scale up for solutions that benefit all of our residents. Massachusetts is well known for our leadership in life sciences and biotech. As many of you know, we played a key role in the development of 2 of the 4 COVID vaccines that were developed in the US. And those life-saving technologies were exported around the globe. We can mirror that in the clean energy space, and in many ways, we're already doing that. We're developing innovative climate solutions here in Massachusetts with global impact. And our early substantial investments in life sciences pay dividends, and similar investments in climate solutions will make Massachusetts an international climate leader, providing jobs and economic development benefits while helping to combat climate change. I'm excited to dig into that topic here today with our panel. We have 3 experts that are developing the future of clean energy, and really with all different types of perspectives and roles. So first, I'll ask the panelists to join me here on stage. Dennis White is the director of MIT's Plasma Science and Fusion Center and a co-founder of Commonwealth Fusion Systems, really working on moonshot technology. So welcome, Dennis. Castro Leiser is the VP of Battery Technologies for Geiner Labs. Castro is improving and discovering the next generation of battery technologies, and these batteries will help completely change the conversation around EVs and energy storage. So welcome, Castro. And Kelly Friend is the VP of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at Nexamp. Nexamp is demonstrating and piloting new business models and innovations of pairing technologies to increase the scale and bring down costs. Welcome, Kelly. So I'll start by asking each of you to give us a little bit about your organization and your background and what you're working on. So Dennis, would you start?
Right. Oh, hello. Yeah, hi. So I'm the director of the Plasma Science and Fusion Center at MIT, and you mentioned our spin-out company, Commonwealth Fusion Systems. And our mission, really, of our center, which is one of the largest interdisciplinary research centers at MIT, is to really look at delivering next-generation clean energy technologies that can scale to meet the energy demands of the world. And the primary focus is fusion energy, which is a scientifically promising but yet undelivered, technically engineering, economically viable energy source, but has the potential to actually supply all of our power demands essentially forever and in a safe way. But it's difficult integrated technology. For this reason, but the good news is that we have more people working on it. We have more resources which are actually being applied to it. We actually have an entire young generation of people who are starting to work on it more, which is very exciting, being here at engineering college as well too. And importantly, we're making really important steps towards realizing the economic viability of this energy source, because in the end, we can't just have new energy sources, although we have to have these. We also have to make them compatible with, in fact, deploying them both, first of all, locally and then globally as well, too, at a massive scale. And the more economically compelling they are, the faster that will happen. And the key example of this is our own prototype device that's being built right now in Massachusetts. I don't know if any of you are aware of this, or how many are aware of this. It's a device called Spark. It's actually jointly being done by Commonwealth Fusion Systems and MIT and other partners. But our goal is to demonstrate fusion energy for the first time ever to humanity, with the idea that that will be the key next step, in fact, it's going to occur about 25 miles away from here. And that itself will be a historic step towards this new energy source. So excited to be here and talk more about the implications of that.
Great, thank you. Castro, can you talk a little bit about Geiner Labs and the work on battery technologies you're taking on?
Yeah, Excited to be here. Thank you very much. So I'm the VP of Battery Research at Giner Labs. We are a Newton, Massachusetts-based small business that's been around for 50 years now. And our core focus is in development and commercialization of clean energy technologies, specifically fuel cell technologies. So using oxygen and hydrogen to generate electricity, electrolyzers, using water, splitting water to generate hydrogen and oxygen. We're also very active in electrochemical sensors for health and environmental applications. And another important area that I'm here to talk about today is in rechargeable batteries. So focusing on kind of next generation batteries beyond lithium ion that can really provide huge, significant improvement in performance and also lower cost.
Thank you. Kelly, can you tell us a little bit about NextAmp and how you're bringing innovative delivery models to the work that you do with solar and storage?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning. Thank you to the Congressman for having NextAmp here and to Olin College. I work, I'm the Vice President for Policy and Regulatory Affairs for NextAmp. Our headquarters is just right outside South Station. We are the largest clean energy company based in Massachusetts, which is really exciting. We were founded 15 years ago by 2 U.S. Army veterans who wanted to participate in the clean energy economy upon returning from overseas deployment. They were roommates in school together and wanted to make sure that their kids didn't have to serve in overseas conflict areas where part of the mission was to protect fossil resources. So they came back to start a clean energy company and to make that impact. And what they did is they kind of chased the programs that were in existence at the time in the, as a result of some of the legislation that Mr. Downing helped pass, did some solar thermal work, some energy efficiency and LED lighting, and about 5 years in realized they were good at commercial solar development. And in the 10 years since that inflection point, NextAmp has grown to a company of over 400 people across 3 main offices. We are a national clean energy deployment company, and that has 2 principal I'd say parts of the business. There's the generation side where we develop, construct, own, operate clean energy resources, and then increasingly a consumer-facing business where we help folks decarbonize. What we did about 7 years ago was learn that there's this huge opportunity in community solar, which is the ability for people who can't or don't want to put panels on their home to nevertheless enjoy the benefits of solar. Much the way you would if you were in an apartment and wanted to have a share of a community garden, you can have a share of a community solar garden. And what we have found is our community solar customers don't just want to subscribe to a solar farm. They want to drive an electric vehicle. They want to find opportunities to decarbonize their heating. And so we're increasingly finding opportunities to help those customers look at their electric impact, find their fossil impact, look at how they spend on electricity, how they spend on heating, how they spend on transport, and find ways to help them decarbonize. And a big piece of what the generation backbone of that community solar business is solar and storage resources that we've deployed at scale. And I think there's been a lot, and I'll kind of wave the flag for distributed solar for a bit. There's been lots of talk about the excitement around wind and other technologies. We have gigawatts of clean solar distributed projects across the Commonwealth that have saved ratepayers lots of money during peak times of the summer. I know Chairman Roy knows this very well and has worked a lot on our issues related to interconnection. But don't forget about distributed solar. We're kind of in the background humming along incrementally, megawatt by megawatt, kilowatt by kilowatt, helping the Commonwealth to move to a cleaner grid.
We still love you.
Great, thank you. Dennis, I know fusion has been around for a long time. We've been working on fusion for over 50 years. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how far we've come and why it's just an exciting moment for fusion and why we're at the point we're at today.
Yeah, so it's we're really at a historic convergence, I would say, of opportunity that's coming from advances in technology and the need, which is the comments, the reason that you're having this conference. So the drive, which is obvious, which is like we need massive amounts of carbon-free energy, and the more we can generate those, the sooner we can get there. And in particular, things like on-demand sources like fusion that have inexhaustible supplies of fuel is this promise that has been out there, you know, as you said, for about 40 or 50 years, because we were able to calculate the promise of fusion. What wasn't achieved, and we actually achieved the conditions of fusion, which most people think, oh, fusion is this thing I've heard of, and it hasn't really worked. Well, like on the MIT campus, we actually made a fusion device that achieved 5 times hotter than the center of the sun, 100 million degrees. It was making 300 trillion fusion reactions per second. This is actually, the science of this is a reality. What was not a reality is the ability to get it economically delivered. And there, this was very exciting. Almost exactly a year ago, out on the MIT campus, we demonstrated a new technology which basically improved the cost of generating the power by a factor of around 40 in a single breakthrough technology. So this was the origins, in fact, of Commonwealth raising $2 billion. It's now one of the largest, tech companies in Massachusetts. It has over 400 employees. It's coupled with MIT and the research which is needed there. And so putting these things together of this science that we know has been sort of dangling there, but putting it now with the integrated engineering systems that look like it could achieve the economic targets, that's very exciting. And simultaneously, our pathway means that we can also accelerate the pace, basically, of developing and doing those fusion devices. This is why, it's going to be order of 3 or 4 years to build this prototype in Devons in Massachusetts, and that's going to put us on the pathway to really realizing fusion as, what its promise has been for a long time. So that's why the excitement is there.
That's great. Castro, I'm wondering if you could also help us feel a little bit like that we're in the battery science world, and what is just over the horizon on the next generation of EV and regenerative battery technologies. Tell us what you are working on and what that could mean in terms of impact for the industry.
Sure, absolutely. So right now, the current state-of-the-art lithium-ion batteries rely on some key materials, particularly cobalt, which is a rare metal. It's expensive, a huge environmental impact in terms of mining and processing this material. It's also sourced from conflict regions. And the whole kind of supply chain of key materials and also battery production is really monopolized by just a few countries in the world. So what we're trying to do is develop battery systems that are completely free of these precious metals. So in the next 5 to 10 years, if we're successful, we'll hope to commercialize a lithium-sulfur battery. So completely removing away nickel, cobalt, manganese, all these precious metals that are used in state-of-the-art lithium-ion batteries. The benefit for this new chemistry is that the energy density is significantly improved. So you can think of that as the capacity to store charge per unit weight of the battery. We have the potential to double or triple the specific capacity of the battery. So to the consumer, that might mean you can drive for longer periods, longer ranges between recharging the battery. We're also trying to address, this approach also addresses the supply chain limitations. Again, so we're using sulfur, which is highly abundant. It's very low cost. So that's an important issue too that we're trying to address. So other chemistries that we're also planning to introduce are sodium-ion batteries and magnesium-ion batteries. Again, using materials that are highly abundant, very cheap, that can significantly improve the performance of the battery.
Kelly, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about some of the innovative models you've used with solar and storage pairing. So one of the barriers we know to scaling renewable energy is our electric grid and our antiquated electric grid. So tell us a little bit about your innovative approach that you're using in Watertown, New York, that really eliminates, it's a non-wire solution, it eliminates for transmission and grid upgrades. And what can we learn from that?
Sure, absolutely. So my company does the deployment, does the engineering, does the design, and the deployment of the resources, and is grateful to the research and development that firms like these two are doing on the innovation of the actual technology. But I think beyond innovating on the technology side, there's innovating around policy, and there's innovating around market rules to be able to deploy at the scale we need to hit the goals that we all agree we need to hit. And the Watertown, New York project you mentioned is, I think, a good example. The acronym is a non-wires alternative, which is this idea that you can deploy technology in a way as to avoid building new wires. So every time we go to interconnect one of our projects, which is the physical tie-in of our project to the local distribution grid, in this example, there are costs associated with the utility, the utility's ability to take that project and have it send electrons into their system in a way that is safe and reliable. And I'll put a pin in the safety and reliability piece to come back to kind of the regulatory innovation that we should be thinking through. This Watertown, New York project was a partnership with National Grid, the local utility there, to find a way to create more capacity at a substation that would otherwise, in a traditional model, require millions of dollars, the building of new infrastructure, including some oil containing transformers. Those projects take years to build. They're very costly, and while that transformer solution is being constructed, any new distributed or clean resources that want to interconnect are paused until that work can be completed. And that interconnection process happens at every interconnection between it could be on your rooftop when there's much more minimal interconnection requirements to interconnect to your local grid. But for our projects, which are 5+ megawatts often, those upgrades can take years to build and cost millions of dollars. And so National Grid identified this particular substation as one where they thought it would be appropriate for a non-wires alternative. They put out a request for proposals, and we were fortunate to win that. And so in partnership with them, we helped design what is a solar and storage project. So we build solar and storage projects all across New York for our community solar customers, but this one in particular was designed and is going to be deployed in such a way that National Grid can call on it at times of peak demand in a way that is unique from how it would otherwise just be sending electrons into the grid to maximize revenue. And in so doing, we avoided that costly transmission. So that type of non-wires alternative is an example of innovating around the design and the use case for these distributed projects that isn't just kind of stupidly deploying electrons at a time that isn't of the most value to the local grid. And New York is, I think, an innovative space to pause for a moment because they created a tariff that explicitly creates market signals for deployment in a more sophisticated way so that you're deploying resources both where and when the grid needs it. And I think the value and the true the specialness of distributed resources and intermittent resources in particular is that you can deploy those in a more sophisticated way to avoid costly upgrades and to supply the grid with what it needs at that moment based on market signals. Which leads me back to my previous point, which is if we're not able to innovate in the policy space to create those market signals and those market rules that allow for projects to show up when where they're needed, we're going to have projects show up where they aren't needed, perhaps at a time they're not as valuable to the grid. And so there's a couple ways you can think about that, but I applaud the Massachusetts legislature and the chairman for telling the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, in addition to safety and reliability, that they have to regulate the utilities based on carbon and equity, which really will unlock the ability for the Department of Public Utilities to regulate the utilities in such a way as to encourage and incentivize and reward them for thinking about their grid, not from a safety and reliability perspective, but from a decarbonization and an equitable perspective, which we need everywhere.
Dennis, I want to ask you a little bit about what is the role of emerging technologies in this energy transition? So why is it important for us to take these big chances, to take these risks, and then once the science is there, so once you're making those scientific advancements like you are now, how do we translate and scale those as things are coming out of the labs? How can we put those into work?
Yeah. So a good starting point is numbers, right? So I'm an MIT professor, so I like numbers. So we have to ask ourselves, how well are we doing as a species? So I'm going to get outside of Massachusetts. How well are we doing as a world in decarbonizing? So the fact is over the last 20 years, worldwide, we basically have decreased our relative use of carbon-based fuels, 0. That's the answer. And that's a sobering answer because, as you can hear, like the commitment that we've made locally in Massachusetts and as a nation, I think, towards this, and even perhaps worldwide, is there, but it's telling us that, in fact, all of the amazing things that are happening about deploying carbon-free energy right now, they're just keeping pace with the increase in worldwide energy demand. And this is what's hard about this problem, right? It's not, it's interesting. It's solved locally by the things that you were just listening to here, but it's still a global problem. So you've got to come up with things that actually have numbers that can actually attack the problem across the board, right, around on these things. And in that sense, this means is that, you heard about some of the innovations in battery technologies, and at its heart, though, we need massive amounts of carbon-free energy generation. And there's only really a few things, really, that we know of the science of that can deliver on those. And this is why I think it's so important that we kind of steel ourselves to the understanding that it's not just about policy. It's actually about putting our shoulders behind new technologies that can actually scale to a point where we're going to be able to outpace the growth in energy demand. And that's going to be difficult. So the opportunity, and I'm going to say the opportunity, I think the obligation of a place like Massachusetts, and look at the Boston area and the intellectual firepower and the innovations that you have in science, technology, and I think in translation. This must be applied actually to starting taking more chances about going faster to be able to deliver on a larger scale. And what this means is not just science innovation, but it means organizational innovations as well too. And in fact, it means, I think, a societal innovation. Like, we have to be willing to actually be pushing ourselves harder in this because we're not winning right now.
So I think we have time for one more question before we open it up to the audience. So maybe I'll have a quick round for each of you. So our role at Mass CEC is to foster these emerging technologies to help with that will help with the cost, adoption, and speed to scale. So tell us a little bit about what the federal and the state government and research institutions like yours, how we can help accelerate those technologies. So maybe we'll go down the line and
yeah, absolutely. So Giener, our business model is actually to use federal funds to kind of seed early stage technologies, show proof of concept, and then raise external funds. So federal funding has been a key source, kind of lifeline for our business, particularly the Small Business Innovation Research Program. Has really helped us commercialize. Every successful commercial story that we have was made possible because of the SBIR program. And I think in addition, certainly state opportunities for funding such as a MassSec are certainly attractive and certainly helpful to us. So funding has been key, and we work very closely with local universities as well as universities across the country and national labs to bridge the gap between applied research and fundamental research. So federal funding, collaborations with research institutions has been key to our success.
I will touch on the need for investments and focus on workforce development. The Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Science and Technology Act, and the Bipartisan Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, if I'm getting that acronym right, has tons of funding for deployment of clean energy technologies that scale from proven, commercialized, technologies that are being deployed to new technologies. A massive part of, for example, the solar investment tax credit and the tech-neutral investment tax credit that will, the solar ITC will transition to in a couple of years, requires certified apprenticeship and prevailing wage on all projects, which is going to dramatically change the landscape of the clean energy workforce. Exactly, right, which is great. And we, NextAmp in particular, is building a lot of projects in Maine. They had a program they passed in 2019 that kind of reformed the net energy billing program and has been very successful in attracting investment. There are not nearly the number of people qualified, trained, ready, willing to build those projects right now. And so in terms of the speed, the deployment goals that we have, they will be diminished, or I should say, every megawatt or every kilowatt that we offset today has incremental value, has greater value the longer it is generating electricity. The longer those projects wait to come online because we can't get the workforce, the fewer benefits they're going to provide. And so Mass CEC and other organizations, universities, can be real partners in finding, training, and getting people ready to build the clean energy technologies. The IRA in particular created a standalone storage investment tax credit, which means you can now get a 30% ITC for building a standalone storage project or for retrofitting a solar project that doesn't have storage. That is going to change the landscape of what our grid looks like in ways that we can't really contemplate now, but only if we have people who are ready, willing, able to build it. And so we look to partners like Mass CEC for that support critically in the next few years.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I could not agree more about the workforce. And it's interesting to think of this as in the public sector, what are the things the public sector does, in fact, almost probably has to do, which is it has to be deeply involved in the training of the next generation of talent that's actually going to deliver these solutions. And having all of that that's really going to be so critical. And like our own parochial version of this is like we were so oversubscribed for students who wanted to come and work on fusion. I literally don't have enough dollars or supervisors to actually have these. It's like let's enable like our young talent around this idea, because it's their problem actually even more than our problem. You can see the gray hair. The other place where the public sector is so critical is in the regulatory environment, because in the end this has to be a larger social discussion, in fact, about the proper regulatory environment for all the new energy sources, about how we do this right, but also that we don't get in our own way, actually, about being able to deploy this, looking at the larger good of what is there. And then finally, I would say the public, because it's a different kind of way to resource these difficult technologies. One of the challenges of energy is the scale of it. It's a different kind of innovation ecosystem that occurs. This isn't like software and things like this. This takes scale and it takes expense. And one place where the public program can come in is all kinds of clever ways to basically use the incentive structures that come along with things like cost sharing and so forth, but then simultaneously tap into one of our greatest strengths that we have, particularly in the U.S. system, which is our education, innovation, commercialization, machine that we have basically in the United States. And the public program coming in to let them do those things well, but still provide a means to actually resource this, that's a key part, in fact, for the public program.
Great, thank you. So I think we have a few minutes for questions from the audience.
Thank you. Thanks, Jake, for organizing this. Quick question for Kelly. You're involved in deploying solar systems. Anyone who flies around in airplanes sees that there's a lot of solar being deployed on green space. Why is there so much flat roof space on commercial buildings that's not being developed? Is there a market failure there, a regulatory failure? Can you explain that?
That's a great question. I think I saw something in the news that France recently passed a law that if there's flat space with over 80 parking spots, it has to be covered in solar. A mandate like that would be manna from heaven for solar developers, because the case to that customer is a lot easier to say, you're obligated by law, let us do it for you. Oftentimes, the low-hanging fruit of the roof space that is either in good enough shape to host a system or that won't need upgrades to do it, or that the landlord, the owner of the building, is comfortable locking into a solar system for 25 years, that's a challenging proposition. And I think that a lot of states have really grappled with how they get the projects where they want them, and sometimes it's just a matter of the regulatory construct paying those projects the premium to be able to flow that money to the customer and say, this actually creates an opportunity for you to make money on that unused space, and you can feel comfortable that you're not going to lose an opportunity to repurpose that roof in some other form or fashion in later years. I don't know that I can point to any state that's really cracked that yet. But I think that it's one that we as an industry are leaning into that conversation, figuring out ways. I think this goes back to Dennis's point about this is a global issue that's solved locally. We can't, like this, the ability to site our projects where they're beneficial to the community is part of the social license of deploying solar, and we're keenly aware of that. And it's not in anybody's interest to deploy solar in places where people don't want it. The problem is that we're siting it on private land where there's somebody who's raised their hand and said, I want to put solar here. And in the absence of a mandate where we can kind of create that forcing function on parking lots and open pavement, we're stuck in the model we're in right now, which doesn't always yield that exact outcome that we want.
Thanks. In the back.
Yes, first of all, thank you all for being here and for the amazing work you're doing. I'm just wondering, as these technologies become more widespread and used at a higher level, what are the byproducts? How are they going to be recycled and reused or repurposed so they don't end up in a landfill or in the oceans, especially locally, but around the world?
So that's a good question. In the battery industry, I think one area of increasing focus and investment is in finding a second life for batteries that have been decommissioned from an EV. So that's one way to address kind of sustainability, is to find a new life. And one application in particular is in grid stationary storage applications. And certainly recycling, kind of extracting some of these precious materials is also another important area. And I think the research is really, investment is lagging there. And I think more work and more investment needs to be directed towards those efforts.
I'll actually give a shout out to a local company, Ascend Elements, who it came out of WPI, is out of the Worcester area, and they work on exactly that. So taking those batteries and recycling the raw materials and putting them back into new batteries. They just won a $480 million award from DOE to build their first factory. So there's certainly innovation and companies working on that very problem here in Massachusetts.
And I would just point out is that the harder upcoming technologies, and I'll point particularly to fusion and things like advanced geothermal. One of the reasons that we're pushing on those is because of their very small environmental footprint and because of the small amount of materials that they use. And the reason for this comes to, it's a technical term, but it's basically power density. Namely, it's the amount of energy or power that you can produce per the mass of the particles that you're of the systems that you're deploying. So this makes those very good, benign from an environmental point of view, because you're really reducing the amount of raw materials that you have to use to produce the energy in the first place. But it also makes them more difficult technologically wise. So this is why you got to do those hand in hand. Yeah.
Regarding solar panels, what happens to old ones when new ones are created that are more effective?
Yeah, so I mean, I will admit I am not the expert on this, but what I will say is the first solar panels that were deployed after PURPA in the Carter administration are just now being decommissioned. The life of a solar panel, assuming there isn't physical damage to it, is quite long. And what we'll start to see, I think, soon is the market for uprating, where you basically kind of break the system down and you optimize it to be more efficient. Sometimes that's panels, sometimes that's the circuitry that goes beyond it, goes on behind the panels. So towns, when we permit our projects, are asking, what are you going to do at the end of the life cycle of these panels? And what we're starting to do is work with firms that are creating an opportunity to recycle parts of the waste streams. But I think for the most part, we're still looking at these panels as having a usable life 25 plus years on. And so the hope is that the need for those recycling firms and the technologies to provide a way to dispose of those materials in an environmentally safe way continues to keep pace with the ability to keep those projects online until we have a real cradle-to-grave solution.
We have time for one more in the back.
Yeah, it's another question for solar panels, because I often, in terms of cost for decarbonizing the economy, I keep in mind that like solar farms are kind of okay, but that rooftop solar is really not cost effective. It's just very expensive. And so you're mentioning community type of solar panels. So I was wondering, where is this thing sort of like located in terms of cost for decarbonizing efficiently the grid? And is it sort of like Like, yeah, where is it closer to solar farms or is it closer to rooftop? And then, like, why do we really do that instead of doing just a solar farm, which is, I guess, more cost effective? Is it just because it's more cool, it's easier to sell, or is there actually some real benefits to that?
So I think part of your answer is to the gentleman's question before, which is where do we put this? And I think that while there might be a cost increase to deploying some of these projects on the built environment, people are way more comfortable with the idea of putting solar on rooftops, on factories, on their homes, than putting it either in green space or in open land. I think the other piece of this is while there may be a cost differential on the upfront cost to build that project on a rooftop, the value of having a more distributed grid as opposed to a centralized grid has been proven, both in terms of the reliability and resiliency impacts and the ability to give people more ownership over how they power their lives. And I think when you take that calculation, what you find is the value of distributed resources is significant. We're not going to solve our problems, to Dennis's point, by just putting by putting solar on every rooftop. We need other large bulk power that is carbon free. But while we're commercializing some of these newer technologies, while we're solving some of our issues around transmission, so transmission is a huge constraint on how you're getting utility scale wind and solar into people's homes as opposed to just onto the transmission system and getting it passed between where the wind blows in Oklahoma to where people need power in the Midwest. Distributed resources are solving a lot of those problems and avoiding, as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of the upgrades we need in the interim. So it's not an either or, I think it's a both and at this point.
Great. Please join me in thanking the panel for their time today.
We're going to head right into our final panel. I'll be moderating this one, and it is about the international affairs and international innovation regarding climate. And the reason we're closing on this is for exactly what Professor White said, which is the cold, stark truth that although we've made a tremendous amount of progress both in science and in political commitment in the last 20 years, we actually haven't made any progress on the net reduction in carbon emissions globally because in particular, the Global South and also China have developed economically at such an incredible clip, lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. It's a success story, but it's also meant that they are voracious consumers of energy. As I said at the beginning, the United States accounts for maybe 15% of all future fossil fuel emissions, 15%. So even though the IRA is on track to cut our future emissions by 40%, that's probably only 6%, if you do all the math, globally of what we need to do. So it really brings into perspective why the leverage behind international agreements and international action is so great. And Massachusetts' own John Kerry, who's the president's special envoy, really pounds the table on this issue that ultimately getting to 1.7 or even 2 degrees Celsius by 2050, it's going to require diplomacy and coordination with the Global South, in particular with China and India. Just to give you some numbers, for example, projected metric tons of CO2 in 2030. For the United States, it's 5,000. For China, it's 14,000. So it's clear who our partner needs to be in trying to decarbonize the global economy. I'm now going to invite up our panelists for this final discussion. We've got Kate Brumey, CEO of Mass Challenge. Kate, please come up. Carlos Arac, co-founder and CEO of Quaise Energy, and I will obviously let them introduce themselves and what they do. And Alyssa Levin, Senior VP of Government Affairs for Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. Thank you each for being here, and let's get right into it. Please take 2 minutes, introduce yourself and what it is that your organization does and why your international footprint is so critical.
Great. First of all, thank you for having me for this important conversation. Kate Brumey, CEO of Mass Challenge. At Mass Challenge, we like to think of ourselves as the global network of innovators. We are a nonprofit headquartered here in Boston, but now with a footprint around the world, specifically Mexico City, Lausanne, Switzerland, Israel, and then also presence in Asia and Africa through our Bridge to Mass Challenge program. We have the extraordinary privilege of working with about 650 early stage startups a year through a network of about 3,000 active experts. So in this conversation ties into the emerging technology conversation we just had, but with a global orientation.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Carlos Araque, co-founder and CEO of Quaise Energy. Quaise Energy is a company unlocking geothermal at a very, very large scale. We talk about terawatts of energy as opposed to gigawatts of megawatts. It's a little bit like fusion in that it's an emerging technology, an emerging space, and one that has the potential to drive deep decarbonization towards 2050 and beyond. I myself am engineering background. I have worked in venture capital. I have worked in the oil and gas industry, left the oil and gas industry to take arms on the energy transition. Glad to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Hi there. Is this on? I think so. Alyssa Levin. I joined Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, CIP, about 7 weeks ago or so. So new to the company, not to the government affairs space. CIP is a fund investor in clean energy projects around the world. We invest in greenfield projects, so new projects, on and offshore wind, storage, solar, and the storage is actually battery and pump storage. Transmission, we're looking at power to X, so that's hydrogen, and various other technologies. We have growth plans over the next 10 or so years to invest about $100 billion globally in clean energy projects, and about a third of that is intended for the U.S. So a lot of opportunity. We're very excited, of course, about bipartisan infrastructure bill, about the infrastructure, about the IRA, and the opportunities that provides. The last thing I'll say is for folks not familiar with CIP, you may be familiar with us through Vineyard Wind. We invested in the Vineyard project back in 2016. I started working on that project back in about 2018. We will be the first large-scale offshore wind project in the United States, about 800 megawatts of offshore wind. And we hope to be online, plan to be online in, well, really 2023, and then finish the project in 2024.
Let's start big picture. All three of you spend a lot of time working overseas, both physically and also with entrepreneurs and with policymakers. Let me ask each of you three big picture questions. One, what is most different about how the rest of the world is viewing climate action and clean energy? And you should pick the geography you feel most comfortable about, whether it's China or India or the global south or Israel. Number two, where are areas of collaboration that you see between the United States and the rest of the world that we are underutilizing? And then number three is, what can we learn? What should we be thinking about as policymakers that the rest of the world is getting ahead of us on? And let's go the other direction now. Alyssa, we'll start with you.
All right, I might need a refresher on the questions. But I think, as we look at especially what Europe and Asia has been doing.
Alyssa, let's do a little closer.
Oh, sorry. As we look at what Europe and Asia have been doing, largely in part due to the geography of perhaps Europe, et cetera, they needed places to look to bring additional renewable energy online. And so Europe in particular was able to invest in offshore wind far earlier than we were. They have been able to do so in a far more cost-effective way and build out a technology and an industry that now is just brand new to us. If you compare that to us, of course, we have been doing onshore wind for quite some time, but we've had the land to do it. And we haven't had the ability to bring the costs down here in the U.S. So that has shifted, particularly in New England over recent years, as it's become harder and harder to bring new energy. difficult to get gas for various reasons, difficult to build new transmission, not enough land to build onshore wind, and so now it makes it more cost effective to look offshore. So that's one of the key differences. Okay, next. Sorry, what was the next question?
I think that was a good primer for us, and we can go on, Carlos.
Okay, so three things. One is how the other part of the world looks at this, the collaboration, and then what we can do to help. So on the first one, I've lived in Europe, I've lived in South America, I've lived here, and I work extensively in Asia. And what I observe is that everybody wants the same thing: energy. Energy is the ability to drive economic growth, to drive prosperity. So that's common across everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. What's very different is the resources and alternatives available to you. If you're in the developing world, you don't have the technological advantages or sometimes the resources to push some of these new technologies to decarbonize your energy systems. So you're going to go and use whatever you have. The case of India and China, they have coal. They will burn coal to guarantee energy security and to guarantee economic development. This is where we can come in and help the situation. I think the only way to deter, if that's the word we can use, deter the continuous use of fossil fuels is to actually come up with better alternatives to fossil fuels. And better doesn't just mean less emissions. It means less land, it means less materials, it means lower carbon intensity, lower labor intensity. So you really have to put something better across the board. And I think the forces of capitalism will just take care of these things. People will just adopt and start expanding and massively going through. I don't think what we have, leaning on Dennis's comment on last section, I don't think we have such alternatives. I don't think wind, solar, and battery are such things. I think they will do a lot to help in the 2020s, but as we go beyond 2030s, we need much more powerful and better energy sources. So I think that's my view. And that's, I think, where the United States can be powerfully effective in providing that.
Maybe I'll build on that point, and then I can go back to some of the differences we see. So I think certainly the most potent deterrent we have is key large-scale technologies coming down the cost curve so that it is a better economic decision for India, China, the global south to adopt some of these emerging technologies. So I think you commented a little bit on that, and that's hard. I think in the in-between, we think about two things at Mass Challenge. One is how can we disproportionately support entrepreneurs from economies outside of the U.S. Get to both commercialization, validation, deployment faster so that entrepreneurs within these economies have the same opportunity to try and change their energy footprint from their home country, as opposed to feeling as though they're importing solutions from, say, the United States. And the second is working in economies like in Africa. We have programs right now in Benin, Nigeria, also in Colombia, to start to enable entrepreneurs to participate in the change and to build their own skill set and ideally participate in what will be generational wealth, community wealth for their country. So that's the sort of community economic development, which we think is as critical to bringing us together in these key efforts as in what we talked about on the earlier panel, getting critical technologies to scale faster. In terms of what we see in differences, I'll comment briefly on Europe, which is sort of has remarkably different vibes that the U.S. is catching up to. So we have footprint in Switzerland, support entrepreneurs from across Switzerland, and have an amazing group of industry partners that have participated in our work since the early days. And I will say that sustainability and climate has been at the DNA of Mass Challenge Switzerland since its inception almost 8 years ago. We have a sustainable food system program, which has equal emphasis on entrepreneurs and innovators as industry collaborators, and they have had a requirement that all startups are climate neutral and now climate positive since the early days. And I think we're now at a point in the U.S. where that's acceptable. There's enough momentum, there's enough acceptance of the critical role that we all play, both companies that are climate first and companies that are not, in participating in this key effort. But I think that's just a remarkably different sentiment in Europe.
Alyssa, I want to ask you about Europe. Carlos, I'm going to ask you about China. And then Kate, I'm not going to tell you yet which one I'm going to ask you about. Alyssa, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has caused huge energy surges. It's affecting Massachusetts' economy, but it's most impacting the European energy economy. Talk to us a little bit about, is that accelerating what Europe was doing already? Is that changing what they're doing? Is it both? What's the politics and the technology like right now in Europe as they're grappling with an oncoming winter and Russia's continued invasion?
I think there's a real recognition in the countries that were reliant on Russian gas in particular that they need to find other alternate sources of energy quickly. The problem is, how do you scale up when we are upon winter right now? So it is a massive challenge. It's also a recognition and support for trying to build out additional clean energy as quickly as possible. So, I mean, I think that there is a real awareness. I mean, it's absolutely in their face. It's absolutely the conversation of the day about whether there is going to be heat this winter and electricity. So I think that it's not going to change overnight, but I think that the driver is now there and the recognition is now there about being reliant on Russia for energy.
Well, and we're seeing renewed investment in nuclear. We're seeing renewed investment in offshore wind, or not renewed, but accelerated. We're seeing the adoption of heat pumps. Are any of those in particular on a faster acceleration curve in Europe?
I mean, yes, generally. I mean, CIP and Ørsted just announced an agreement to build 5 gigawatts of offshore wind off of Denmark. So I think there's the recognition, but there's also awareness that this takes time. You can't just erect an offshore wind farm, overnight. So it's going to be a driver, and the geopolitics is a driver, but it's going to be a long process.
Carlos, I'm going to ask you about China, but I want to give a quick primer to our audience about Quaise and the technology, just because I do think it's relevant for its potential adoption overseas. And please correct me if I'm getting it wrong, but basically, geothermal's been around for a long time, can dig into the Earth's surface and release heat captured beneath the Earth's surface anywhere from 1 to 3 miles. But it's expensive to do that because the drill bits break, and you've got to pick your spots very carefully on the Earth's crust because the heat's not everywhere distributed. Your game-changer technology is that you're using microwaves to melt the Earth's rock. You can go as deep as 12 miles. It doesn't really matter where you're drilling when you go in that deep because you're going to hit heat regardless. And the potential that I'm understanding from that is that you can retrofit existing coal plants, and they can keep the superstructure, the plumbing, but then they're having a different heat source than burning coal. Is that a fair recitation of it?
That's very well said.
Okay.
Yeah, now you can pitch.
I
for
practiced. So that the reason that some people might be asking, they're like, well, this sounds like this is a new technology. You're venture funded. How come you weren't on the previous panel? I mean, frankly, you could have been. But the reason you're on this one is what's exciting to me about this is China, 14,000 metric tons, accounting for a third of all of humanity's emissions right now. As you said, they're not going to do it because they want to be nice to the United States. They're going to do it because it's in their self-interest. What is the potential for the adoption of super hot rock geothermal in China and in India as well?
Yeah, so my aspiration is that geothermal, deep geothermal, either what we're proposing, becomes so compelling and so scalable that it is the obvious choice to repower at a massive scale. It doesn't mean that you don't do wind and solar. It just means that it's really the workhorse. So if you imagine, let's look at what China is doing. China is the largest consumer of energy in the world. It surpassed the United States already. It accounts for almost the same amounts as we do, a third of worldwide emissions. And they're increasing. The United States carbon intensity, it's decoupled from GDP growth. That's fantastic. We've done that. They haven't done that. So as they continue to grow, it's going to continue to skyrocket. India is very similar, but a little bit behind where they are. So to me, they're building power plants. They're building wind. They're building all out because they have to guarantee energy security for themselves as part of their economic development going forward. So how do you break that cycle? For humanity's sake, let's not even talk about geopolitics. For humanity's sake, because if they don't succeed, none of us succeed, period. You're going to have to put in their hands a technology that it's a plug and play with everything that they're building. So if they're building hundreds of power plants in the next 10 years, let's find a technology that at some point plugs and play and decarbonizes them in a brushstroke. That's what we're trying to do. I think that's the way you change the energy transition dramatically. If you don't do that, those power plants are invested for the next 30, 40, 50 years, and they'll continue to emit way into the 2070s and beyond. You gotta shortcut that.
Kate, you have an office in Mexico City, correct? Can you tell us about Latin America and innovation there and deployment of clean energy?
Yes. So I think over the last certainly 10, 15 years, the growth of the startup and venture sector in Latin America has been extraordinary, but until more recently remained relatively concentrated in two large ecosystems, Mexico City and Brazil. And I think what we've seen to date, and there's some signs of this changing, are two things. One is that a large amount of the innovation in the early days was what you might call sort of fast follower, copycat of business models, technologies, or applications of technologies that were invented outside and were being imported into novel markets and therefore able to scale. And so that was one. And then more in the software technology space than I think what we've heard about here, which is what we might classify as the tough tech. And I'll say that that is, by and large, what we continue to see from a dominance perspective in at least our portfolios, though we are seeing a rise specifically in innovation in the agricultural sector, which we're excited about and we think can play a key role. I think when we think about the Global South adoption of clean energy and its interaction with innovation, I think it's not dissimilar to what we talked about with China and India, which is we need technologies that can be deployed in their markets at a scale and a cost that's acceptable for their ecosystems, and so that's very related to the conversation that we've been having here today.
Final question for the panel, and then we're going to turn it over to audience questions. From November 6th to November 18th is COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. Major gathering of heads of state, heads of government, and senior policymakers from across the developed and developing economies of the world to talk about our climate commitments and our the work still to be done. What do you think is the most important thing that could come out of COP27? And any order that we want, whoever has the most important realistic thing.
The realistic one is hard, but I think the conversation and the really challenging tension between achieving our reduction requirements and climate justice, I think is one that's both tricky but critical, and it's been the thread even here in this theme. That's where the sort of tension lies. I think the most recent estimate is we need $1 trillion of support for developing economies to support them through this transition, and so I think I certainly can't take credit, but it's absolutely important to bring it here. And I think any progress we can make on that front will be meaningful, and I think that's going to require new forms of how capital moves, new forms of collaboration. I think there's interesting conversations around new business models that allow developing economies to adapt technologies that have been developed in the U.S. but still participate in the economic upside. I think all of that has to be on the table in order for us to make progress here.
So I think the conversation, my aspiration would be that the conversation moves from what I can do as a nation. It's all very centered in that. What are my commitments? What are your commitments? And everybody's trying to do their thing. But in the end, it's an us problem. It's one atmosphere, right? So how do we move the conversation beyond what we can do as countries and what we can do as a humanity, right? I don't know how to do that. I think giving money to the developing world is part of that, but it's just the beginning of that. How do we make sure that we're creating the mechanisms, the incentives collectively, not individually? Because I think that's what's going to reveal different pathways, different way of doing things, different way of incentivizing collectively as opposed to individually.
It's hard to follow Carlos's response because I think that is the end goal. But I also think that if we're talking about, what is going to come out of this discussion, and the best thing is a conversation or perhaps an actual solution to the show me the money question or statement. And so that comes down to both what dollars is the U.S. going to commit to global climate solutions? And, Congressman, that's going to be partially on your plate here in the lame duck session of Congress through the appropriations process. But also, what are developing countries going to do, and how are they going to commit in terms of some sort of fund to help the underdeveloped nations to help solve this problem? And John Kerry came to the table to suggest that businesses should have a role in this to be able to help fund through some version of climate credits to fund development in nations that need it to support renewable energy development. So those are some solutions.
We're going to take questions. I'll quickly add my 2 cents to the COP27 question before we take the first one, which is, to me, the most important thing that can come out of this is the United States and China need to start talking again. We cut off conversation about 6 months ago. The world's two biggest economies need to talk about a global problem. There's plenty of things that we can compete on: South China Sea, Taiwan, Indo-Pacific. There's a lot of areas where we're going to compete, maybe even aggressively so. But on climate change, it's going to have to be cooperative, and we got to start that conversation. Who do we have up first, Stephanie?
Over here.
Hi, thank you. This might be a tough one, but I was wondering what your thoughts are on balancing our need to be global citizens. This is a global problem. With also trying to maintain an edge for American businesses. And, with both solar and battery, right now, China has an edge. Most of the global production is out of China. So how do we come up with, taking American innovation and also maintaining, sort of business advantage, technical leadership, while also tackling this global problem? Thank you.
I have thoughts on it, but I want to make sure our panelists get a first chance at this.
I mean, my first answer is that Congress in the U.S. has done remarkably well in the last year to try to be at the table, have this conversation, be global citizens, but also set businesses and clean energy up so that we can invest in this country. And that's through the bipartisan infrastructure bill and through the Inflation Reduction Act.
You need to do both. I think you need to be a global citizen by providing the technological innovation that you create, and that creates an export opportunity, and it helps you, remain in the lead. But they're the same, one and the same problem. It is a global problem. It's not a specific nation's problem, but we can lead. We're still on time to lead. You're right, wind and solar have gone from the supply chain side to China. I think we can still recover from that, and we're trying to do things to that, but I think there's room for more things like fusion and deep geothermal. I think that really can change the game.
I'll just add sort of one statistic, which is 55% of the top performing startups had at least one founder that was an immigrant, and that's 2/3 if you look at son or daughter of an immigrant. So just to speak to sort of the both and approach, certainly we're in a very important race to be a leader, if not dominant, in the atoms, bits, and cells, and which cross-cut climate, much less our broader technology needs. But I think we can only be competitive if we're working collaboratively and if we're continue to be a destination for top talent around the world.
100% that. I mean, immigration policy is climate policy. Because, I mean, it's I'll give one very specific example to your question, though. It's one thing that I've been working on deeply. We've got to rethink our clean energy supply chains as a country. For the last 70 years, so much of our energy politics and, frankly, so much of our geopolitics overall, because so much of it's driven by energy, has been, where did the dinosaurs happen to die and which country is ruling that place, right? So right now we're in a situation where the President of the United States, I don't care what party you are, this is not part of it, this is just the reality of it. You've got to care what Russia, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and Iran think about things. And those are 4 autocracies that we do not want having outsized leverage in global conversations, right? And so now we've got to get ahead of this for the clean energy supply chain. Places like Peru, Afghanistan, ironically, have huge stores of rare earth elements, copper, nickel, et cetera. And we need to be making sure that those countries, one, have solid relationships with the United States, but 2, that they are able to develop those resources in a way that is for the benefit of their people and not for, not to be just pillaged, as unfortunately happens recently.
Can I add on to that just
Please.
quickly? So, a lot of this conversation is how do we develop solar? I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, 80%, a significant amount of solar panels are coming from China. They're coming from the Xinjiang region of China, and Congress passed, rightly so, passed legislation, maybe about a year and a half, 2 years ago now, to put a presumption that any of these panels coming in, they're presumed to have been made with forced labor, unless you can prove otherwise. This means that solar panels are actually not coming into the U.S. right now. They are caught up with Customs and Border. They're going through the process of being able to prove that their product has not been made using forced labor. But it is a huge issue for the supply chain. It's a huge issue for whether the country is going to be able to develop solar energy and install solar energy. And it just goes to show that we need to develop that supply chain here in the U.S.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Jackson Madnick. We developed the Pearls Premium Ultra Low Maintenance Lawn Seed. It grows 6-foot roots, so it needs 75% less water and sequesters 10 times the carbon compared to ordinary grass. And we're a past winner of the Mass Challenge, and that's a very important group to further innovations all over the world. My question is about timing. That the notion of getting to net zero by 2050, it seems like a concept from 20 years ago. It does not relate to the fact that by 2050, our economy may have collapsed, a third of the population might have to move, and things are too late. Why aren't we talking about a timeline of getting to net zero in 2030 or 2035? If you could talk about timeline.
I'll start. So, fully agree. If we could do this right now, we should do it right now. But I think the reality is of where we are today, that is the best we can come up with. And by the way, I don't think we're going to make 2050 unless dramatically new advances in new technologies come about. Let me even open that up more. Why is it about 2050 and not 2100 and 2200? Energy transitions happen every 200 years or so or more. Why are we so focused on the short term? That's what brought us here in the first place. So yes, there's urgency, but we shouldn't shortchange the urgency with finding the real solutions that will take us forward beyond 20, 30, 40, 50, and beyond. So, so yes, we should do it as soon as possible, but the reality is I don't think we have a means to do it as soon as possible. We don't have the technologies to do it as soon as possible. I don't think it's a problem of policy. Policy plays a role, but I think it's a problem of technological gaps to do this.
The one policy area that I would add to that, I agree with what Carlos is saying. Fundamentally, it's a science and tech acceleration issue. But one of the reasons I've been such a strong proponent of a carbon tax, ideally a border-adjusted carbon tax that really puts the whole world, gets skin in the game, is that way we've got all of the economic incentives aligned for all sectors of the economy to be decarbonizing as fast as possible. The Inflation Reduction Act is tremendous, but it's pushing in one direction. It's all carrots for us to move. Good and important, but we also candidly need some sticks. And say, for the very heavy polluters, you're going to be you're going to have to be paying into our transition. I estimate, based on my own informal whip count of the House, that Democrats would probably need 260 votes in the House to be able to pass a carbon tax. So we had a good midterms, but we're not there yet.
It's here. Mr. Iraq, this question is for you. You gave a great description of how China and India have to really be addressed in their coal consumption over the next 20 to 30 years, but I didn't understand the gaps that your company faces in taking your technology into those countries in a really forceful and useful way. So can you address what those gaps are?
It's a great question. Yeah. So let me assume that the technology is already fully developed, which it is not. It's in development, but let's assume it's already fully developed. It's commercially available. So one of the plays we're leveraging two very large workforces, supply chains, and regulatory frameworks around the world that are very established. The first one is the oil and gas industry. I come from that industry. That is, to put in perspective, that is the only industry that has consistently, for the better part of our lifetimes here, put a terawatt, this is 1 million megawatts, a terawatt of new energy into the mix every year, year on year, to keep civilization running. So to me, it's fundamentally important for the oil and gas industry to see an opportunity here, to say that's the way we're going to go and deploy this. And the national oil companies in China, in India, and the international ones all over the world will actually drive that through. The second one is leveraging existing infrastructure. If you have hundreds of power plants and you can, at the right economics, transform them from burning fossil to non-burning fossil, you just do it. So I think those are the gaps that we're facing, but by design, we're actually pulling into those workforces and infrastructures to eliminate the gap. You know, it's almost by design, it plugs and play. So that's how we're going to play this.
That is going to be our last question. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our terrific panel. I'm going to be brief. You've heard from me. I want to leave time for everybody in this room to get to talk to one another more, because that's a big goal of this as well, is to make connections within the climate action and clean energy community. So I'll say simply this. I hope you leave today feeling optimistic, because the challenges are immense. Everybody's in this room partly because we all understand that. But so is the talent and the work ethic of the people who are trying to solve it. And for that reason, I am deeply optimistic about climate action and clean energy. And you've got my word that I'm going to continue making it a priority in the 118th and beyond in Congress. Thank you for being all here today. Appreciate it.